Greetings, YouTube fans, and welcome to the first of a series of new videos and a relaunch of Nerd Juice. Have you been waiting for us to return? Have you? Well, we're back. So anyway, this is our new series, and it's going to be called Avoided. So basically, what it's about is about things that you've avoided or put off for many years, not a specific time, could be many years, could be a few years. And we're going to start today with this little gem. Iron Maiden Virtual 11. Wow, what could that be about? Well, I'm going to explain. So, recently, I had the pleasure of going to the cinema and I went to see the latest Iron Maiden documentary that got a theatrical release. And I'm not going to talk about that so much, but I thought it was okay. Not exceptional. And I think any even casual Maiden fan has probably heard all the anecdotes in the documentary before. But I would say it was a fair distillation of their career to date. But it got me thinking, like, well, I love Bruce Dickinson era Maiden, and I really, really liked Paul Di'Anno era Maiden, but I'd never really listened to Blaze Bayley era Maiden. In fact, I'd never listened to this album at all. I'd actually avoided it. So what I've done is I purchased it at a very cheap price from eBay, and I thought I'd give it a listen because I'd avoided listening to the album for, well, since when it came out, which I believe is like nearly 30 years. I haven't got my glasses on, but I think it came out in 98. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we're getting on for 30 years since the album's been released. I've never listened to it. And I've heard some of the songs because Bruce Dickinson sings some of the songs live now. So I've heard a few of the songs. I think Klansman is one of them. Yeah, the Klansman. I've heard that live, Bruce Dickinson sing that live, and it's a pretty good song. But I'd never really listened to Blaze Bayley, and well, I thought I'd better rectify that, mainly for the purpose of this series, which is called Avoided. And if you can think of a better name than Avoided, it's the best thing that me and my co-host Melvin Killen could come up with. If you can think of a better idea or a better name for it, please write it in the comments. So yeah, what do I make of Blaze Bayley era Iron Maiden? Well, I've heard some quite unfair things labelled at his tenure in the band. I've listened to a little bit of the album before this, and I can't remember what that's called now. But this I've never ever listened to this one. In fact, a little anecdote: I was actually working in a music store called MVC. If anyone ever remembers that store, it was a bit like a low rent HMV, I guess. And I remember this album being released, and I remember putting it on the shop floor and putting it out on the shelves. But I never actually listened to it because I'd kind of gone off, conventional metal by that time. I was more into me grunge. I'm afraid metal fans. I know, you're not supposed to. Metal fans can't like grunge for some reason. I've no idea why. It's all rock and roll to me, baby. But anyway, so I was more into me grunge, me Stone Temple Pilots, me Soundgarden, me Pearl Jam at that stage in the 90s, and I kind of avoided metal to a degree. But this album in particular, I avoided. So what do I make of it? Well, I'm not going to review every single track because that would be tedious, and there's loads of other YouTube videos doing that. So I will just say this. I came to the conclusion, and this is all conjecture and merely theory on my part. But I think when this album it was a very strange time in music, wasn't it? When this album came out in the 90s. I mean, the Spice Girls were running rampant through the streets of London and everywhere else worldwide, and grunge had really taken hold of the masses, and metal had kind of fallen on sort of sad days, really. And I think this album really reflects that. It all sounds a little bit tired and laboured and a bit generic, if I'm being brutal. But I think maybe Steve Harris's idea was to recapture some of that vibe and that rawness of those early Paul Di'Anno era albums, and I guess on paper, Blaze Bayley seemed like a good choice at the time because he'd come from a band called Wolfsbane. And I remember Wolfsbane, and I thought they weren't a bad band. I thought they were quite good, and his vocals were quite gruff. He didn't have the range of Bruce Dickinson, but you could argue that he had the range of Paul Di'Anno. So it kind of made it kind of made sense really for him being hired. But what I would say is the trouble with that is all the production on the first two albums was quite raw, and the vocals were quite feral. And I think the trouble with this album is, on the two listens that I've had of it, so please bear that in mind. I've only listened to it all the way through twice. Is the music's quite slick and intricate, but the vocals are quite sort of raw and rough and ready. And I'm not sure the two different styles kind of mesh. There's a bit of a clash and a bit of a jarring going on, which I found a little bit unpleasant on the ear. But I will say this: overall, there's some fairly good songs. I think some of them might outstay their welcome a little bit. There's one in particular, if I can remember it. I think it's When Two Worlds Collide. I might be wrong. It goes on for 9 minutes, and it's just like, it's very repetitive. And I did find that overall the whole album is a little bit repetitive. Like the chorus is repeated over and over again. And I think they could have cut a good couple of minutes off that song. But overall, not as bad as I was fearing. And actually, maybe I shouldn't have avoided it after all these years. So, it'll be in place in my collection of Iron Maiden albums, but I wouldn't say I will be listening to it an awful lot from now on. Maybe occasionally I'll dig it out for songs like The Klansman, which isn't too bad. Although, like I say, Bruce sings that live now, and I'm sure I've got that on a live album somewhere. Bruce Dickinson singing that. But overall, not as bad as I feared. So I'm going to go easy on Blaze because he gets a lot of stick for not being Bruce Dickinson, which is kind of fair because no one's Bruce Dickinson, are they? Apart from Bruce Dickinson. So anyway, that is an album that I've avoided for many years. And now I'm going to hand you over to my co-host. But before I go, I'm going to say welcome back, viewers. Hope you enjoy what we're doing. Subscribe if you do. Send us a like. Send us a comment, a nice one, please. Don't be rude. And over to my co-host, Melvin Killen, aka Calvin Millen.